It really is. All right. So, we're starting a podcast. Hello and welcome to Learning the Law, podcast about all things legal with a focus on current events, where we try to teach you things in an hour. My name is Ashley, aka Phoenix Nymphy, and my co-host, who is the lovely looking man of the hour, my husband Ron. Look at him all fancy and he looks so good. This podcast is purely educational and should not be taken as legal advice. This podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship. This podcast is based on his interpretation of relevant law, and any opinions expressed are the opinions of the individual making them and do not reflect the opinions of any firm, company, or other individuals. Ron is a licensed practicing attorney in the state of California.
Yes, I am. Since September 15th of 1999.
Yeah. So Ron had some important things today, which is why he's all dressed up, as you do as attorneys. And it's also date night, which is kind of why he's still wearing it. And I'm over here in my cheesy beard shirt from the Guild. I am just dated myself. I also have purple hair now. Yeah. If you wanted any more indication on which side I swayed on the political spectrum, all right. We all know that I bring the opinion, you bring the law in this podcast, and that's the only reason why it works. Because you keep me straight.
Every so often, I'll put my opinion out there.
You are a little low this week. I need to turn you up a little bit. There we go. So we actually have an update.
We do.
We have an update on the NRA bankruptcy from last week. For those of you who did not join us, please go check out the NRA bankruptcy. But to long story short, the Attorney General of New York is suing the NRA for mismanagement of funds and wants to dismantle the group as a nonprofit organization. And they were trying to avoid this litigation and reestablish in the state of Texas. And the Texas federal judge said, no. And that it was a bad faith ruling. He actually agreed with the trustees. He ended up agreeing with the trustees. He did, however, dismiss it with, he didn't dismiss it with prejudice, which means they can file bankruptcy again. But he did say, he did warn that if they chose to file a new bankruptcy case, his court would immediately take up some of its concerns about disclosure, transparency, secrecy, conflicts of interest of litigation counsel, among other things, which could lead to the appointment of a trustee to oversee the organization's affairs. So right. They didn't essentially get punished, which is something that I personally would have liked to have seen, to be held accountable. However, they didn't win. They were thrown out essentially on their butts.
Thrown out of Texas, yeah.
Yeah, they were thrown out of Texas. And he straight up told them, you are trying to get around a regulatory statute, and that's not okay. And I think that's awesome that he did that because, you can tell. And I mean, we all know Texas tends to support the NRA. So sometimes you question whether or not, they got good people down there, but I guess they do. I'm sorry. I'm really opinionated today. Like, I've been reading a lot of stuff today, and Ted Cruz is why I hate Texas. I'm just going to be honest. Ted Cruz is why I hate Texas. Ted Cruz. And people voted for him. So if people voted for that man, that means most of the state is what voted for him.
Yeah.
Not a fan of Texas right now, okay? Do better. I have too many people of color friends who tell me horror stories about Texas. And I grew up in the South, y'all. Come on. But anyway, hello, Twin. We see you, chat. We are live right now. We're gonna stop coloring my opinion because I'm sure most of you have tuned out now because she's going on a rampage. What we're here today is to talk about attorney billing hours, which Ron mentioned in the last podcast, and legal bribing. That's right. Legal bribing. Bet you didn't know that was a thing that exists. Well, guess what? It's called lobbying. That's right. That is considered legal bribing. We kind of mentioned it last week and we're like, you know what? We think that would be a really good podcast. So I'm going to stop talking now because you're all here to hear him anyway, because he's the one that's smart.
Yeah, you're smart too.
Okay. Anyway. So attorney billing hours. So how does that work?
Okay. When you go in and hire an attorney,
Yep.
a lot of times you'll give him what's called a retainer. And a retainer is a lump sum in order to hire the attorney. And we'll take, for example, you want to sue somebody and he gives you $5,000. Now, that $5,000 isn't the whole cost of that lawsuit. A lot of, we'll say the attorney bills at $500 an hour, which is
so they get $5,000 on top of. Okay, hold up. So I come in, I give you the $5,000, and like from hour one, you still charge me for $500 an hour.
Yeah.
What's the $5,000 for?
To pay that $500 an hour.
Oh, you have to pay up the $500 up front. Oh, okay. Okay, so it's not an additional fee.
Not until that $5,000 runs out.
Okay. Gotcha. So that's kind of like hiring a creative person and say, I want you to create this mural. Here's what I want. Give me an estimate. And like for gig work, like I'll be like, okay, this will be probably about $75 to $100. Pay me like 10% of that to get started. And then you can pay the rest of it off. I mean, it's a little bit different, but yeah, like I take an upfront fee because if I do the work and then don't get paid, at least I got some pay because I've had that happen in the past.
Right. And attorneys have too.
Right.
But you have an idea of how much that total mural is going to cost.
Sometimes. Yeah. Depending on, I mean, because you do, well, you should too. You do the work every day. Like starting out, you're not going to know, but eventually you'll learn, okay, I'm pretty quick with this. I'm pretty good at that. So you should have a general idea of how much it's going to cost you.
In general, yes. However, say your opponent in the case hires an expert that charges $3,000 for a half-day testimony.
Ugh.
And you're used to experts charging only $1,500 a day for their testimony.
Okay, all right. That's fair.
Yeah, that kind of experts get paid way too much too. But that's a different story.
Wait. Is this you saying that you get paid too much to do your job?
No.
Because I was about to say, you do not get paid enough to do your job.
I don't. And if anyone's curious, I get billed out because the insurance companies don't want to pay. I get billed out at $150 an hour to the insurance company.
But you don't see that.
I do not see that.
And you're okay with like putting that out there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I barely see 15% of that. True
Okay.
story.
So back to, so they give you a retainer, which is essentially, a deposit for your work, which is
Right.
okay. As a gig worker, okay, that's fair. I understand that concept.
Now, if you're really worth that $500 an hour, the work you're going to do is timely and competent. However, this is where the theft comes in my opinion. And there'll be a lot of opinion in this particular piece.
We'd like to emphasize Ron has been an attorney since 1999. So he's been a practicing attorney for 22 years now. Is that math accurate?
22 years as of September 15th.
Yeah, so 22 years almost. Over 20 years of experience in the legal field. So while this is an opinion, it's an opinion based off of a lot of experience.
Yeah. Now, this is different than a contingency fee.
What's a okay.
Okay. Now, sometimes when you hire an attorney, they'll say, you don't need to pay me anything unless you win.
Oh, those people.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what happens is whatever you recover, the attorney puts all the money up front, pays for all the expenses. A lot of doctors will do liens on the case. So if a judgment comes in, they get paid from that judgment, or the injured party gets paid. And then usually what happens is once a judgment comes in, the attorney who's put the money up front takes 40%. So when you see the advertisement that so and so got me $2.1 million,
Right.
that attorney got himself $840,000.
Okay.
And you don't know how much the
Right.
doctors got paid for their medical treatment, because they've done
Medical comes out of that as well.
Oh yeah.
So like that 2 million isn't really accurate. An accurate description. Isn't there an attorney that got in trouble for that out here? Were you telling me a story where he can no longer in his commercials state how much people received because
it used to be the law after that, because it was so prevalent. He got me 2.1 million. He got me 10 million. People would go to these attorneys expecting that much money. And so there was a law passed that attorneys could not advertise that kind of judgment that they received. That's why afterwards, after that law was passed, that particular commercial said, blankety blank blank got me. Oh, you know the story.
It's a state law. Yeah. It's not a.
It was a state law. It's been repealed.
Oh, it's been repealed. Okay.
Yeah. That's why you see the billboards that say, like, I accident attorney.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
We've recovered $150 million. Yeah, that means that
yes,
$60 million.
To answer a question from chat, yes, that was a California only law, but it's been repealed, so now they're doing it again. Because in Georgia, they give the amount all the time. Right. When was that repealed? That was recent then, if that was repealed, because I mean, you're telling me the story of that guy 10 years ago. Yeah,
it was repealed.
It had to have been within the last 5 years.
No, before I went to Atlanta.
Oh, it was repealed before you moved?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. All right. Interesting. So, okay. All right. So that's no longer That is
Right.
interesting. I wonder why did they repeal? I know we're getting off on a tangent, but welcome to the podcast. That's how this podcast works.
We're getting to that. It's called lobbying.
Oh, look at that segue. Look at that segue. All right, we'll come back. We'll circle back to that. Look at that. Oh, look at that. Too soon. Too soon. All right, focus. All right, attorney billing hours.
The third way attorneys get played now. Attorneys play you. You don't play attorneys. Is a flat fee. And a lot of that is either criminal or bankruptcy, where $750 you can file a Chapter 7, and then the attorney gets the $750, does everything. If there's more time involved, then that $750 would cover under his hourly. Then he just cheated himself out of that money. Flat fee cases usually take quantity. So if you do 10 bankruptcy cases a week, which is not unusual,
Right. Wasn't that bankruptcy, it's a bunch of filing and understanding the law that I'm not going to have time to do because it is very time consuming.
Right. Now, that's
and you have to show up at court and everything and all that stuff.
Now, a tax attorney, that's the same kind of thing. A lot of forms, a lot of knowing the law. They'll do an hourly.
Okay.
And if you ever saw the movie The Firm,
I feel like we just watched that. Oh, yeah, we did. That was a good movie. Solid movie.
Yeah.
Good movie.
That's what he tells the mob how they're getting screwed by the law firm that he wants out of.
That's right.
They're, cheating on the billable hours. Now, one of the ways you can cheat on billable hours is...
Can you pause that? The dog is really bothering us. Give me a second.
Okay, so one of the ways is, say, telephone calls. They will bill a telephone call and they'll say, well, the minimum phone call that we will bill you is 10 minutes. Even if it lasts for 2 minutes. Because their billable hour is either done every 10 minutes or every 15 minutes.
Okay. Now, I also, because I have an option to do that as well. And I'm like, in order for me to gauge my cost for my own content, because it's really hard when you work gig work and you work for yourself. I'm like, I do the hourly thing and it's a minimum of that hour. So even if the video only takes me an hour to make or 30 minutes to make, you're still paying me for that hour.
Right. Now, are you doing 2 or 3 videos at a time in that hour?
No, generally speaking, no.
Right. I've been at places where I've taken 4 or 5 calls within that 15-minute time period.
So each
one of them get billed that 15 minutes.
That's so different from what I do.
So even though
that's so messed up,
I've only done 15 minutes worth of work, I just billed out an hour and 15 minutes.
How can you do that? How is that legal?
Because it's in the contract that you signed that a phone call is minimum 15 minutes. It's a bunch of crap.
Okay, so playing devil's advocate though, do you not see lawyers are getting contracts? Who would imagine, right, Rachel? Right? So, okay. On the other side, there are times where you're gonna have a client where a quick update, hey, blah, 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 2 minutes, and you don't see that client or talk to that client or do anything for that particular client's case for another week or whatever. And so then and that might be a little bit more like, I mean,
Right.
and if you're working for yourself, to me, if you're working for yourself, it doesn't seem quite as bad because you're not going to have 15 clients that you're talking to in 15 minutes. You know what I mean? Big firms, it's a little different. You are going to have that. But like if you're working for yourself, you're not going to be calling clients regularly and working that way.
Not if you're in a very small practitioner. This is how billing hours work at a small practitioner. I need to keep the lights on. This motion usually would only take me an hour, but I need $1,000 to cover my utilities this month. I'm going to take 2 hours to do this motion. My client doesn't know that it shouldn't take me 2 hours.
Okay, but we all do that. We all poop on company time. Okay. All right. We all do that. We all do that. Every single person who works for themselves has done that. Is it a crime? Yeah, it's a little shady.
It's a little shady. What if it was 4 hours?
Okay. No, I get what you're saying, but I see both sides of this. I see
Or-
both sides of this,
And
and
I'll tell you,
I'm having a hard time articulating the other side that I'm seeing on this.
I'll tell you the history of some auto repair bills in California. Sometimes a place would take 3 hours to fix a flat. Sometimes it would take 15 minutes. And they would charge the hourly labor rate. And it depended on the business needing money or just being greedy and gouging customers. The Bureau of Automotive Repair had to step in and say, enough of this. It's an unfair business practice. And you're going to go by the Michelin guide of how long a job takes.
Even if it takes you longer than it should because you're learning.
Correct.
Okay, so I will. Okay,
And if you do
but
it
I'm
in
not
half
paying.
the
I'm
time,
paying for your expertise, not the like. I'm paying. So even if you do get it done in 15 minutes or you get it done quicker, I'm still willing to pay you that fee, that amount of money, because of the fact that you have that expertise to do it, right? Like,
okay, if you're
are you saying we need a Michelin guide for attorneys' fees?
there are certain things that should be done to standardize the fees.
Okay.
Now, I don't have the entire answer for that because a motion for summary judgment, for example,
Well, every field is different in law.
can take, 40 hours or it can take 2 hours. Depends on the complexity of the case.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Interesting.
uh, a person who is hired an attorney who is getting charged billable hours should go over that bill extensively and see exactly what you're being billed for.
Well, just like with medical, look at
Right.
that $500 bandage. What?
Yeah, you're getting ripped off.
I mean, every big corporation. Honestly, that is the epitome of capitalism. Like that's what capitalism causes is exorbitant fees because we don't look at what we're paying for.
Right. And so people need to look and see what they're actually getting for their money. Now the
Now,
average person is going to look at that bill and go, looks good to me. But there have started to pop up on the internet places you can go to that say, is 2 hours is 2 hours a legitimate time to draft a motion to compel, for example? And you'll find out that 2 hours is within the range to draft a motion to compel. Now, in some cases, you have to draft 4 motions to compel discovery because each one is different. Special interrogatories, form interrogatories.
For the
I mean,
same
yeah,
case?
the other 3 are cut and paste motions. They don't take 2 hours.
Oh, okay.
All you have to do is change maybe 10 words in each motion, but they'll bill for 8 hours.
Okay.
And that's not right either because you didn't take 8 hours to do that. You took 2 hours, maybe 2.5.
Right,
So
but how is anybody going to know unless the attorney themselves admits to it?
that in lies the problem with billable hours. And that's why I say it's a legal way to steal from your client.
Now, I know that like when you put in your hours, you have to do it incrementally, correct?
I do.
Like
I
how does okay, here's my biggest thing like cuz I've read books and stuff where the attorney I cannot remember, but I for some reason I don't remember what book cuz this was before I even met you. Um the protagonist of the book was an attorney and she was talking about how she'd lived her life in 15-minute increments
yeah.
because okay, I have to do this in 15 minutes. I have to study this in 15 minutes. I have to do that in 15 minutes. And she was like she wasn't a litigation attorney. She was a research attorney. God, I wish I could remember the freaking book. But I remember that distinctly. And this just brought that memory back up. So that's how it is in big firms. You're living your life in 15-minute increments.
Yes. Even medium-sized small firms.
And you have to keep up with, okay, well, I went and took a shit for 20 minutes. So,
Can't bill for that poop.
right. So that
But
it's so much more complex than working retail or, working at any other like working. It's
a lot
so weird.
yeah, a lot of like large corporations will say you have to bill 2,000 hours a year or you're going to get yourself fired at the end.
Okay.
So if
That
you work that out, that is 40 billable hours a week if you take a 2-week vacation. So you can either bill for every second of an 8-hour day, which is really not kosher. You're
there's
not
no way you're
working
going to do that.
right, especially if you take a poop. You're working 12 to 14 hours a day to get that 8 hours billable in.
So
But
that's inhumane.
but what's going to happen is you're going to get tired of working that and you will start billing for that poop. And you will justify it to yourself as prepping and thinking about the case while you're sitting there.
So it's a cycle. Like, even if you start out not wanting to do that and not liking that, eventually it wears you down to the point where you don't have a choice and you're just like, fine, I'm going to
Right.
charge. I'm going
This
to
is
make all these calls in 15 minutes and charge every single one of them.
hey, when you talked about the 2-minute status update.
Right.
I worked at a firm where if we didn't have enough billable hours Monday through Thursday, we were told to call clients up on Friday and give them a status update.
Even if there was no status update.
Correct.
That's
Just calling
just,
to tell just calling to tell you that there's been no movement either way in your case, Mr. Jones. But we're working on it, and we're going to try and settle as quickly as possible.
that just feels so illegal.
2-minute phone call, 15-minute bill.
Mm,
Yeah, it's no wonder people hate attorneys.
yeah. So just, mm, I just,
If there was a way that we could make everything a flat fee, I would be all for it.
well, I mean, not to be a cynic, but attorneys are so used to making so many, six figures and higher that that's never going to happen. They'd have to be happy with just making a livable wage.
Yeah. What I would like to see is the state bar step in, since they're the ones that are supposed to be the ones with, the ethics rules.
Right. But attorneys are the ones who oversee that. That's like asking the cops to step in and do an internal investigation. You're investigating yourself. You need an outside committee to do that.
Well, the state bar should set up a committee. So if someone wants their bill reviewed, not even complain about the bill, but if you want your bill reviewed, you should be able to send it to that committee and they should be able to tell you whether or not it's a reasonable fee.
So, how would you do that? You'd have to have
Well,
somebody who wants to lobby for that, wouldn't you?
I would want that job. I'd take that job.
Seriously, though, like someone has to basically bug the state bar to do that,
Yeah. State bar is not going to do that.
not on their own.
No. It's like, the insurance commissioner in the state of California oversees the rates that insurance companies can charge for auto and health and all that
Right.
stuff. The insurance commissioner usually comes from the insurance industry.
Yeah.
You
It
know,
just, well, that's like the people making our laws are attorneys who are outdated and don't work with the people. So it's or like, yes, let's look into these government officials as another government entity who works for the government. It's just not going to happen.
right. You got to have an oversight committee that is not,
Affiliated.
not affiliated with whatever they're supposed to be overseeing.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit more difficult when it's the government, right? But like you can have other committees to oversee whatever it is, right? Like you don't need to have the agriculture committee investigate themselves, have another committee to investigate the agriculture committee or whatever. I'm just making like committee. I don't know. I'm sure there's some type of agriculture committee, but like I'm just,
Somewhere,
you know what I mean? Like I'm just like coming up with something off the top of my head. So basically, like there's no way to change it unless you have attorneys with good conscience who actually give a crap and want to make a change. But how do you find that out? Like how do you find more people like you?
that is a problem. I'm pretty unique in this viewpoint.
I know that there are lawyers out there who are like you, but it's really hard to find them. You have the people who they're good people, they're nice lawyers, but they are like, you know what? It is what it is. You know what I mean? Like they just whatever. It is what it is. This is just how it is.
And the rate of billable hours makes it such that people, even middle class people, middle, working class, the poor, can't afford your average attorney anymore.
No.
You know,
And they're the people who need attorneys the most because You have divorces, you have wills, you have bankruptcies, you have trust. There's so many things outside of criminal that you need attorneys for to help you.
Now, criminal law is one that takes a lot of flat fee cases.
Just
And
be-
generally, that's because, if your client is found guilty, they're not going to pay you anymore.
So, what industries do you know of that are flat fee as far as attorneys go?
Bankruptcy is generally fat fee.
Fat free.
Bankruptcy. Wills
hmm
under a certain amount of money. I mean, if you're a millionaire, they're not going to charge you a flat, you know,
It's
you know,
it's
a
incremental
sliding
depending on
scale.
the amount. Yeah, that's it. Sliding
Yeah.
scale. Okay, that makes sense. Because I mean,
Tru-
if you're dealing with more money, means it's gonna take a little bit more to shuffle around.
Right. Same with trusts.
Yeah.
Criminal law is generally a flat fee. Caught myself there. But generally, all your business litigation, billable hour.
So when you're dealing with corporations, insurance companies, all that stuff.
Right.
Wow. What about divorces? Are those usually or family
Divorces,
law?
if it's a summary dissolution, you'll see a lot of flat fees. And a summary dissolution is just a simple no contest, fill out the form, we're divorced, 6 months later, sign the paper. It's different in every state, but that's pretty much California summary dissolution. And everybody goes their separate way.
When they're just like, yeah, it's a mutual breakup. We're not going to worry about splitting stuff. She gets her stuff, I get my stuff kind of deal.
We don't have to worry about,
No kids, all that stuff. Yeah.
When it gets into custody fights and that kind of thing, yeah, that's going to be billable hours now.
Speaking of divorces, did I tell you about the neighbor's dog, and how they found the owner?
Oh, did someone have a divorce and they just let it go?
Okay. All right. Sidebar. Okay. I have to tell y'all this story. So our neighbors, which is also my hairdresser, her boyfriend found a stray dog, but it was a really well taken care of dog. And they took her to go see if she had a chip. The first place said they didn't have a chip. So, they're like, all right, cool. So they, put up posters and everything, and we're looking and all that stuff. And about a month later, they were like, well, I guess we're stuck with this dog. It's fine. Let's go have her checked out. Well, when they took her to the vet actually found a chip. And it turns out the owner, who her boyfriend called, and she said she was just bawling, and the dog's name is Cheyenne, and her ex took the dog, sold it to someone here in Riverside, and then whoever he sold it to just didn't take it. Just like, we don't know what happened. We don't know what happened after the dog got sold, but he was so angry. He didn't want her to have the dog.
That's not uncommon.
I don't think I could handle being a divorce attorney, because I think I'd look at people like that and just like punch them in the face. Like, you are that petty. You are that petty.
Well, I'm glad that she and Cheyenne were reunited.
Yes. So yes, the ex sold her dog. So anyway, they reunited her, and the dog, like she said, when they started calling her actual name, she completely changed too. It's like she knew. So yeah. Happy story, weird story, I know, but that just reminded me, and ADHD brain, which I don't know that I have, but I'm being tested for. Yeah. Anyway, my brain's like, oh yeah, let me tell you this story, this anecdote. about a divorced couple. So yeah, that was anyway. Back to attorney fees. I
Okay.
apologize.
I was trying to find a segue into billable back into billable hours, but there wasn't one.
No, there
Anyhow,
wasn't.
anyhow, there needs to be reform. So
Sounds like we need reform on a lot of stuff, but yeah.
people can afford attorneys again.
I mean, if if you look at it, the attorneys that are our politicians are literally bajillionaires because they're bajillionaires before they get into office.
And they get even richer when they come out.
Right. Because there's no regulation over that. There's no oversight over that. And you have people, we're going to segue into the lobbying. You have people actually gifting things to them to allow them to get more money. And each
Yeah.
state is different. If you go to the sorry about the dog.
NCLS.org.
NCSL.org. It actually gives you the state chart, how states define lobbying and lobbyist by state. So each state is different when it comes to their lobbyist. But and we'll focus on California because that's where we're at.
Right.
Lobbyist means either of the following. One, an individual who receives $2,000 or more in economic consideration in a calendar month other than reimbursement for reasonable travel expenses, or whose principal duties as an employee are to communicate directly or through his or her agents with any elected state official, agency official, or legislative official for the purpose of influencing legislative or administrative action. So it's a pretty basic, straightforward, and there's a lot more to that as well. I'm not going to read all that. But your basic definition is it is a person who is paid to influence politicians to make laws based off of whatever their organization they represent wants. So
Right.
they are paid to legally go and schmooze.
Correct. And they have to register as a lobbyist. Um, you just can't go and schmooze and give your congressman money.
Which I
First,
think, which also kind of like the campaign, it kind of rolls into campaign funding as well, because you'll have we'll go with the NRA because that's the biggest thing. Like they admitted in their bankruptcy stuff that they paid people hundreds of thousands of dollars
yeah.
during their lobbying.
Yeah. And what they do in order to get around the whole gift limit, for example, California, a lobbyist can't give uh, an official more than $10 in a
Right.
calendar month. But that doesn't say that they can't give $1 million to his campaign fund.
Right. And that's essentially a bribe.
And that is how,
That's the definition of a bribe. But it's legal.
well, yeah. And that is how they get away with all these lobbyists uh, donating to the campaign fund, whereas you and me have a limit.
Right.
They don't have a limit.
No, right. And so what is okay, so the point of a lobbyist is to get certain issues heard. But the problem is the people who can afford lobbyists are corporations
Right.
because they
And
can afford that kind of funding, that fees, those donations, those dinners, those yacht parties.
because generally your elected officials are not going to see you or hear your argument if you don't contribute a lot of money to their reelection fund.
And I mean, that's why several people are vying to change campaign funding.
Right. And it needs to be changed.
Now, my next question is, why do we need, not why, but do we need lobbyists?
Do we need them? To a certain extent, I'm going to say we need lobbyists for certain things.
I mean, if your Congress people are doing their job and actually getting out and talking with the people, they shouldn't need lobbyists, because then you're going to hear straight from the people what their grievances are and what they want to change.
And generally that would be true. And I would agree with you for the most part. And I agree with you in principle. But when you have a congressman that represents 1.5 million people in the state of California, for example,
Right.
you know, and I don't have those figures ahead of me. It may be exaggerated. Whereas some other state would only have, a congressman representing 70 or 80,000.
Yeah, that's true.
And even at that, you can't adequately represent the people that have elected you.
This is another example of why we feel we should expand our Congress and actually get rid of the Senate and go to just a House of Representatives, because then you'll have more representation of the people, and it'll be a little bit kind of like a parliamentary system.
When the Constitution was written, there was a representative for every 30,000 people.
Yeah.
Now, if we did that in California, we would have over like 120 people in Congress, people in the House. Yeah.
We would have to limit. Yeah. I mean, but then what if you expanded the Senate as well? Then, and so then you'd have so many people. I mean, I don't know. This is just me throwing it out as I'm thinking about it. Like, change how the Senate works. First of all, the Senate, well, I don't know. The more I think about term limits, the more I'm like, longer term limits seem to actually do better because they think more about it. When you're not focused on having to get reelected as much, you tend to actually make better decisions. I mean, the Supreme Court is a perfect example of that. So
constitutionally, the Senate does not represent the people.
Who does the Senate represent?
The Senate represents their state.
Okay.
And it's a fine line difference, but that's why there's 2 senators for every state. But there's a varying amount of House of Representatives depending on the population of the state.
Okay, but like,
and in the beginning, senators were not elected. Senators were appointed by the governor of the state.
See, maybe we should go back to that, where the governor actually appoints the senator.
It would make for a heavily GOP Senate if you did that, by the way. Because there are more Republican states than there are Democratic states. On the other hand,
okay, yeah, there are, but that's because the heavy Republican states are less populated, and there's a lot more states that are less populated than states that are populated.
Yeah, over the past 20 years, you would have had Republican senators from California.
Oh yeah, The thing is, Republican politicians have not always been bad. The current Republican Party is not a good Republican Party. But that, like, it's not just because it's GOP doesn't mean it's a bad thing. The current GOP is, I will fully state, is a bad thing. Especially the fact that they are trying to oust one of their top 3 people because she doesn't agree with Trump and thinks and agrees that he incited the insurrection that almost got several of them killed, which I find so weird.
I will say this as my opinion. She is setting herself up to be part of the GOP reform.
Good.
You will see her running for president one day.
It's going to split off. It's going to split. The GOP is at the point where it's going to split, and you're going to have the white supremacists, because that's what the GOP is run by right now. And then you're going to have Republicans.
Yeah,
because that's the difference.
Well, we're getting off of the lobbying.
Yeah, we are.
But there has to be some kind of campaign reform in order for there to be a lobbying reform. Otherwise, the lobbyists are just going to keep on donating to people's campaigns.
Right, because so there's never going to be lobbying reform unless you have campaign reform. Because, and you have to have people, again, that are willing to say, I don't need these millions and millions of dollars.
Well,
it's
there
greed.
Needs to be, whoever raises more money is the one that gets elected.
Really?
Yeah. There are exceptions. But generally, the money gives you access to TV and radio and just inundation.
So if we gave them all the same amount of time, because if I'm not mistaken, we're supposed to give them the same amount of time on radio and TV.
Not anymore.
That was repealed?
Yeah, that regulation was repealed a while ago. That's why you don't see any...
I remember learning about that in school.
Yeah, that's why you don't.
Okay, I'm old.
You don't see any liberal talk show hosts or opinion hosts on Fox News, and that's why you don't see any real conservatives on MSNBC, because you don't have that requirement anymore.
Holy crap! That just blew my mind. And that explains why stuff is so polarized now, because our media is not required to show both sides anymore.
Right. It's a process. It's a result of the deregulation of media. There was once a law that said, and the FCC oversaw it, you could have one TV station, one radio station, and a newspaper in any particular market.
Well, Murdoch has a bunch.
Right. And that was deregulated. And now basically the media is controlled by 6 companies.
Yeah.
And if those companies don't like the news, they don't air that news.
Okay, so I find this fascinating as a film person, because you have the Paramount Accords that actually broke down the Hollywood studio system, and said, you cannot do this, which did exactly that. They own their own distribution, and so they own their own studios, they own their own theaters, and the actors were worked to death. Literally, some actors died, several. But so they deregulated that and said, you cannot also own the theater. You have to let all these other people show your stuff, and it can't be because Fox Studios, right? The Fox
I think
Theater.
they started to regulate that.
So which is why you now have AMC, Regal, and all of these other theaters that are, huge now that play from all of the different studios, right? It doesn't focus on just one, because in some areas you had like a Fox theater, but you didn't have like a WB, a Warner Brothers theater. So you weren't able to get those movies.
Right. You'd be inundated and then I'll just use this as an example. You'd be inundated with Marvel movies,
Right.
but you'd never be able to see a DC movie.
Exactly. Just because of the studio that produced it or whatever. So,
right. So now you're basically getting 3 different points of view. You're starting to get an extreme liberal view. You already have an extreme conservative view, and you have basically
you're moderate.
one media outlet in the middle that's going nuts, trying to balance those 2 extremes out, and
Yeah.
not doing a very well. They do as good a job as they can, but they're not doing.
Who were you talking about?
CNN.
Oh, yeah. CNN can lean one way or the other depending on who's writing. I mean, I think NPR and PBS do a really good job at trying to stay along the lines.
CNN used to have a great, and I know we're not on lobbyists anymore. We're on the media.
Well, I mean,
you used to have a great show called Crossfire,
I remember that show.
and you would have, yeah, it was still on during Clinton's time. You'd have 2 of the quote liberals and 2 of the conservatives, and they would debate civilly, believe it or not.
That's another thing. People don't know how to be civil no more when they're having discussions. It's either you believe me and I'm right, or you're just wrong.
Right.
Well, I mean,
today means socially conservative. There are very few fiscal conservatives in the House or in the Senate anymore. And by that I mean Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, market conservatives. The other problem with lobbying reform is you're going to run into First Amendment problems.
Right, because it's been deemed it's part of free speech. Yeah.
And it is.
It is free speech, but it's also if you think about it, it's legal bribing. So there's got to be some kind of oversight there. There has to be. You've got to stop that spending. Yes, go up there, lobby, get their attention, but you don't need to give them millions of dollars. You shouldn't. That shouldn't be how it works. Because I have a question about that, because what if can we send a lobby out there, or would we have to form an organization to have a lobbyist go and,
if we were rich enough, we could send a lobbyist.
See, that puts every average everyday person's viewpoints and grievances out the window. It's not a fair system having lobbyists.
See, this just popped into my head. One of the ways you could stop the influence of a lobbyist would be to have a spending cap on an election.
Spending cap on lobbyists or spending cap on the politicians?
Your election, you're running for, senator. You can only spend $10 million on your reelection, period. Doesn't matter where that $10 million came from.
And it doesn't matter where you spend it. You can only spend so much.
Correct.
So you have to disperse your money wisely.
Right.
Well, I think that, and I would assume the media companies are what lobbied for the repealing the regulation for politicians. Like, who actually would, who, I want to know, I want to look that up now. Who actually asked for that deregulation?
Every station that gets its license from the FCC should be required to give a certain amount of time to each organization, each
Yeah.
person that's running.
Yeah, I agree.
That should be a condition of the license. It's not. And if you take a look, for example, at the Trump campaign 2016, there was a brilliant strategy to get free airtime every single night because he would keep himself in the news. And every single night, the news media would basically give him free advertising.
Yep. That's exactly what he was doing.
And that, I got to say, that was a brilliant strategy. He didn't have to spend money for media, you know, hardly at all in comparison to other candidates.
So, how are like we as everyday people, how are we supposed to be heard if we can't afford lobbyists? How do you get your stuff to them? You know, aside from, you know, the campaigning, the calling and all of that stuff, like how do you even get them to consider a bill that you think should be passed?
Well, in the old days, you had unions, and a lot of people were part of a union, and you could go to your union and the union would lobby for you. Can't do that now because there aren't a lot of unions left anymore.
Would organizations like Black Lives Matter,
Yeah, you have to find an organization that
RAIN, the Rape Abuse Incest National Network,
right, that mirrors what you want your congressman to do.
and help them get the funding for that lobbying. See that?
Right.
So basically, get off your butts and get active. I mean, in any way, you need to be active. If you have grievances with your government, you can't just voting in the presidential election is never, and we say this all the time, that's never going to make a change. You have to get off your butts. You have to actually do things, you know, call your senators, call your representatives. But more than that, you can also go to these organizations that have the same values that you have. And there are millions of nonprofit organizations out there that do that. I mean, the NRA is literally in the middle of they're going to have a trial. They said somewhere around 2022 because the bankruptcy did not stop what they were working on.
And the NRA had one of the most powerful lobbyists in Washington.
Yeah. So, you know, and they're technically a nonprofit organization.
Right.
And they can, and I mean, they're being investigated for mismanagement of funds, but not everybody does that.
I want to say something else about lobbyists before
the
podcast wraps up. There are a lot of lawyers in Congress because historically, lawyers were the ones that wrote the laws.
Mm-hmm.
That's really not true anymore. The lobbyists write the law and give it to the representative, and that's what they vote on.
Well, a lot of lobbyists tend to be attorneys.
a lot of lobbyists are former congressmen who are who've lost an election or retired. They become lobbyists themselves.
Yeah.
Um, and what happens is, you can Google this if you phrase it right. A congressman will say, "Yeah, I voted for this law. Now I get to find out what's in it." Because they voted for the lobbyists, they didn't vote for the legislation that was put before them. They never read it, but because this guy or this entity it gave him a couple million for their campaign fund, he's voted for it.
I've heard some people make that joke, and I'm like, how is that that's not funny.
It's not a joke.
That's not a joke. You should know what you're signing. You should know what you're doing.
Yeah,
This is your job. It's literally your job. That's not a funny joke. And I've heard them say that joke before.
yeah, it's not a joke. It happens.
Ugh. And with that, we're going to end on that note. That is legal bribing. Lobbying is legal bribing.
Just like billable hours is a way to steal from your client.
Yeah.
I'm not
So,
saying that every lawyer steals from their client, but
no.
it's a way for them to.
Yes. And it is something that these are both two things that need oversight. It needs regulation from entities that are not part of the problem.
Right.
And like we know a lot of attorneys that are good people. It's in no way saying attorneys are bad people. There's just a lot of attorneys. That's like,
yeah.
I mean, that's like saying all people who own cats are bad people. No. There are bad people who own cats. There are bad people who own dogs, but not all cat people are bad people.
Right.
I'm
just saying, need to be active. You need to find an organization that will advocate for what you feel needs to be changed.
Yeah.
And if you hire an attorney, you got to be vigilant with what they're billing you.
And that's essentially what we're here on this podcast, is to teach you things that you probably don't know about. And to hopefully give you a more in-depth perspective on how things work in the legal field. And lobbying is a part of that. Politics is a huge part of that. So that's why we talk a lot about politics here. But it's because we want you to understand it we want you to have more knowledge on it so you can make a better decision on which attorney you're going to go with, an organization you're going to support, a company you're going to support. I mean, there's a lot of companies now that I do not invest in and I don't buy from because of their lobbying techniques, the way they treat their associates, all kinds of things. And it's a lot. It's a lot to keep up with, and I know it sounds like really cynical and really like depressing, but it's not, because when we all collectively go, okay, these people are not doing something so good, I'm going to actually try to make a change. One person can make that change. We can make that change.
Yes,
thank you so much for being here. We do appreciate it. And if you have any questions, please make sure to, let us know what your questions are. We want to answer your questions. We want to know what you want to know and help you get a better understanding of the law.
And I think next week we may touch on gerrymandering.
Yeah, that was one I wanted to talk about.
And the reason why the census was important. And
yeah.
So if you have any questions concerning that, you could get them in ahead of time and we can address it live.
Unless anything like pops up, like the NRA bankruptcy, like last week, we were like, ooh, we're going to do that. We will definitely talk gerrymandering, because I know that's a kind of a big topic that's been talked about recently since the census is technically over.
Right.
So, yeah, thank you so much for listening to Learning the Law. If you like this podcast and want to hear more, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, and share in all your favorite places. You can find it hosted live on Twitch at twitch.tv/PhoenixNymphy on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific. Use the hashtag #LearningTheLaw on TikTok or any other social media to follow more there. You can find Ron on Twitter at Necrokijo. That's NECROKIJO. And me on most social media platforms at Phoenix Nymphy. If you have any questions, please tweet, comment, or email at twolazydogsmedia@gmail.com. This has been a Two Lazy Dogs production.